5, Lesson 4. So by now you should have settled on a 2, 3 or 4 note cell, something very, very simple. It's just an example of a very famous 2-note cell, or something like, which we obviously heard in the dressmaker's score. So you should have settled on your cell. We've also done a little bit of investigating into how other composers have developed their simple cells, but I'm going to show you a couple of examples of what you can do with your cell and how you can transform it. So at this stage of your orchestral writing process, you're not really thinking too much about how you're going to orchestrate your cell or what instruments you're going to give to it, etc., etc. You may have already had some loose ideas about this that have maybe come to you throughout your process, and that's fine. Make a note of them and we can come back to them later. But for now, we're really just improvising ways that we can develop and transform our cell just at the piano on its own. So let's say I've come up with a very simple cell like this. So say that's my 4-note cell. Okay, something very, very simple that I can then work with. So the first thing that you can do to transform this is to simply change the rhythm. That's one easy way of varying your cell. Now, another way of developing your cell is to move it into a different key, to change the starting note. So let's say it's here. What happens if I cut and paste that exact same idea, so preserving the exact distances between my notes, but I'm going to shift it up so it starts on G. Now, this is a little bit tricky actually. I've got to make sure I preserve the exact intervals. So have a look at how far away the notes are from each other. Okay, and I can keep moving this idea around. So this cell could now become something like this. Cool. All right, so when we take a cell like that and we cut and paste it into new areas, we call it a sequence, and we often see that with cells that move up or down by a step. So something like this is a sequence, for example. You probably noticed my F key isn't working at the moment, so that's why that's not coming through. I have to call Nord and get them to sort it out. So basically you can cut and paste your idea up or down. So if you're moving downwards, and so forth and so forth. So that's a cool way of generating some interesting developments. The other thing you can do is use augmentation. So that essentially means lengthening your notes to something that are doubly as long. So instead of it being this, your statement might actually be this. Okay, so that's when we're augmenting your notes or making them longer. Diminution is the opposite to that, where we're shortening your notes. So instead of it being, it's going to be, and this is really handy when we start taking your cell and turning it into other things like a harmony or an accompaniment figure. Something like that could be a really cool bit of background harmony. And I could even place the cell over the top in an augmented version, so longer notes or longer durations of the notes with my shorter durations down here. So I'm sort of superimposing my cells on top of each other now. And what happens if I then move them around to different starting notes? Okay, cool. So the next thing you can do to add interest to your cell is to add embellishment to it. Now, all embellishment is little trills and frills that you add to what's already there. So for example, something like that. That's quite a little jazzy little kind of addition, but it could be anything. Okay, so we're adding in a few more notes, but we're still kind of preserving the original idea. Just little embellishments there. Okay, so the next thing we can do is use retrograde. So that's essentially playing your cell backwards. So instead of it being like this, I literally play the last note first and work my way back to the start. And again, I can use all these different ideas in combination with each other. So I could use this in diminution. And then I'm going to turn that into a background figure. And then play something over the top in normal time. Now, what happens if I take some of these ideas and go a little bit wacky? What happens if I have this guy playing based on E, but what if I have my main cell statement up here instead? It's a bit of an interesting effect. Or I can play them both at the same time. Now it's an interesting background texture. Okay, cool. So some really interesting ideas there. The next thing you can try out is octave displacement. So at the moment, our cell falls within a very small area. We can essentially cut and paste some of those notes up or down an octave so that they're displaced essentially by an octave. So something like this. Or now that might be kind of cool textural effect, or if you had something really sparse. So that can be kind of a cool effect as well. Now, fragmentation is something that we've seen a lot of, and that's essentially where you are going to be taking snippets of out of your cell and using them in different ways. So we've got 4 notes in this cell, but what we're going to do, we're going to take a little kind of cell within a cell, if you like, and then start moving that around into different spots. So I could take that, that's the first interval of my cell, that's the second interval. So what I'm going to do is start using this as almost like a new idea. And then the second part of my idea, remember, was this. And again, I can mess with the rhythm, or I can combine other of these ideas as well. So I'm taking this idea now, this interval here, and I'm moving it around. So it's almost become a new idea. And this can also move around. Cool, so we've got so much material now that we can work with just by going through those few things. Now, another example we saw in the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony example that we looked at a few lessons ago was the elongation or extension of your cell so that it becomes a little bit more like a melodic statement. So here's our cell, but I might want to extend that or just change one of those notes at the end slightly to go somewhere new. So it still retains most of that original cell, but we're just elongating it slightly and going somewhere a little bit different at the end. And again, if I move this to now I can change that elongated passage to whatever I like, and it doesn't have to be the same every time. So, feel free to slightly change your cell in different reincarnations. Now, the really cool thing that I like to think about at this point is I'm just going to sort of have a bit of a brainstorm about how I can transform my cell into different musical ingredients. So the things we looked at lessons and lessons ago. So melody, harmony, a bass line, all those kinds of things. Now, if this is my cell, on its own, it's not that exciting, but this could be transformed into a bass line. It could also be transformed into some kind of energetic rhythmic passage in the background, and eventually it could be placed onto something like strings. So my bass is down here playing that cell very slowly whilst this is playing the cell really fast. So I'm using augmentation and diminution at the same time. A bit of a phrase extension there. Now what if I swap it around? What if I get this guy to play fast and this to move a lot slower? Okay, cool. The other thing we can do is invert our cell. So it starts with a fifth going upwards, then that falls by one, and then back up by one. So if we invert it, we're going to go in the opposite direction. We're going to go down 5 notes first. So we went up by 5, so let's go down by 5. So down by 5. So originally we went up by 5 and then down by 1. So now let's go up by 1 and then back down by 1. So we're really sort of flipping it upside down. So instead of, we get, now this could be used in a number of different ways again. You can use this kind of this inverted cell in all of the same ways that you have used your original cell. Change the rhythm, octave displacement, phrase extension, all of that stuff. So the really cool thing I like to do now is to sort of combine these on top of each other, literally layer them on top of each other. Okay, so There's so many things that you can do. There's even heaps I haven't talked about. You can change time signature, you can change tempo, you can play something that's in a different kind of feel. So at the moment it's 1, 2, 3, 4. What happens if we went 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3? So changing the kind of the rhythmic feel to it. So there's heaps and heaps of ideas that you can experiment with, and that's essentially all you're doing at this stage. You're just experimenting with ways of transforming your cell. I'd probably sit down at the piano and simply hit record and just let yourself play without the click track on and just get some really broad ideas at this stage. You're not really thinking, as I said, in terms of orchestration yet. Just come up with a few loose ideas. We're going to then come back to some of these and reuse them for our bass lines and our harmonies and various other things that we're going to start layering and building over the next few lessons. So have fun messing around with your cell at this stage, and I'll see you in the next lesson.